It was a super busy day at the airport. People were everywhere rushing with suitcases, talking loud, and waiting in long lines. The big screens showed flight numbers and times, and the air smelled like coffee and airplane fuel. Into this crazy mess walked Marcus Jones. He was a tall guy with a friendly smile, carrying just a small black backpack over one shoulder. Marcus had his boarding pass in his hand, ready to get on flight 247. He wasn't looking for trouble. Nope, not at all. He just wanted to go home after a long, tiring week. His shoes squeaked a little on the shiny floor as he headed to the gate, and his brown eyes sparkled with a little bit of excitement. Flying wasn't new to him, but today felt different somehow. He didn't know why yet. Marcus was wearing a plain blue shirt and jeans, nothing fancy. His hair was short and neat, and he looked like any other guy you'd see on a plane. Most people didn't even notice him. They were too busy checking their phones or yelling at their kids to sit down. To them, Marcus was just another passenger, someone who didn't stand out. He liked it that way. Being quiet and normal was how he rolled. But there was one person who did notice him, and she didn't like what she saw. Her name was Karen, and she was a flight attendant on flight 247. Karen stood by the gate, holding a clipboard and wearing her bright blue uniform. Her hair was pulled back tight in a bun, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. She looked like she was ready to boss everyone around. When Marcus walked up to hand her his boarding pass, she didn't smile. Not even a little. She stared at him, her eyes narrowing like she was trying to figure something out. Marcus said, "Hi," in his usual nice way, but Karen didn't say it back. She just snatched the boarding pass from his hand and looked at it hard, like it was fake or something. Then she looked at Marcus again, up and down, and her nose wrinkled a tiny bit. What was her problem? Marcus wondered. He didn't know yet, but he was about to find out. The line moved fast, and soon Marcus was walking down the long tunnel that led to the plane. You know that tunnel thing? It's like a hallway with windows that connects the airport to the airplane door. It smelled like rubber and old carpet, and Marcus could hear the plane's engines humming outside. He stepped onto flight 247 and looked around. The plane wasn't huge, but it wasn't tiny either. There were rows of seats, 3 on each side, with a skinny aisle down the middle. People were already stuffing bags into the overhead bins and arguing about who got the armrest. Marcus checked his boarding pass again, seat 12B. That was his spot, a window seat near the middle of the plane. Perfect. He liked looking out at the clouds. As he walked down the aisle, Marcus nodded at a few people. An old guy with glasses smiled back. A mom with a baby waved. Everyone seemed fine except for Karen. She was already on the plane, standing near the front, watching him like a hawk. Her arms were crossed, and her foot tapped on the floor. Tap, tap, tap. Marcus didn't get why she was acting so weird. He hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't loud or rude. He was just a guy with a ticket, heading to his seat. But Karen? She had decided something about him the second she saw him, and it wasn't good. What was it about Marcus that made her so mad? That's the big question, and trust me, you're gonna want to stick around to find out. Marcus got to row 12 and slid into his seat by the window. It was a tight fit because the plane was packed, but he didn't mind. He put his backpack under the seat in front of him and looked out the little round window. Outside, he could see workers in orange vests driving those funny little carts with bags piled high. The sky was gray, with thick clouds rolling in. Looked like rain might be coming. Marcus leaned back and took a deep breath. Home was just a few hours away. He was ready to relax. But relaxing wasn't going to happen, not yet. The other passengers settled in. A lady with curly hair sat next to him in 12A. She smelled like flowers and carried a big purse. She smiled at Marcus and said, "Hi, I'm Clara." Marcus smiled back. "I'm Marcus," he said. "Nice to meet you." Clara seemed friendly, and that made him feel a little better. The seat on his other side, 12C, was still empty, but someone would probably take it soon. The plane was almost full now, and the noise was getting louder: kids laughing, people chatting, bags zipping shut. Flight 247 was ready to go. Or at least, Marcus thought so. Up at the front, Karen was busy. She was telling people to sit down and buckle up, her voice sharp like a teacher who's mad at the class. Hurry up, please, she said over and over. Most people listened, but she kept looking back at Marcus. Every few seconds, her eyes flicked his way. He could feel it, even though he wasn't looking at her. It was like she was waiting for him to mess up or something. But Marcus wasn't that kind of guy. He followed rules. He was polite. So why was she acting like he was trouble? It didn't make sense, not yet, anyway. The plane doors closed with a loud thunk. That meant no one else was getting on. The engine started to rumble even more, and Marcus felt the floor shake a little under his feet. He liked that feeling, it meant the trip was starting. The overhead lights blinked, and a voice came on the speaker. "Hello, folks, this is your captain speaking," a man said. "Welcome to Flight 247. We'll be taking off soon, so please stay seated and keep your seat belts on." Marcus clicked his seat belt shut and glanced out the window again. The workers outside were waving big sticks to guide the plane away from the gate. Everything was normal. Everything except Karen. She walked down the aisle now, checking on people. When she got to row 12, she stopped. Marcus looked up at her, and there she was, staring down at him like he'd stolen something. "Is this your seat?" she asked, her voice loud and mean. Marcus blinked. "Yes, ma'am," he said, holding up his boarding pass. 12B. He showed it to her so she could see. The paper had his name and seat number printed right there in black ink. No mistake. But Karen didn't look happy. She snatched the pass from his hand again, just like she did at the gate, and squinted at it. "Humph," she said, like she didn't believe him. Then she gave it back and stood there for a second, arms crossed again. Clara, the lady next to Marcus, frowned. "What's her problem?" she whispered. Marcus shrugged. "I don't know," he whispered back. "Maybe she's having a bad day." Clara shook her head. "She's rude," she said quietly. Marcus didn't argue. Karen was rude, but he wasn't going to let it bother him. Not yet. He just smiled and looked out the window again. The plane was moving now, rolling slowly toward the runway. He could see other planes taking off in the distance, their wings slicing through the air. Cool stuff. But Karen? She wasn't done with him. She walked away, but Marcus knew she'd be back. Something about her didn't sit right. The way she looked at him, the way she talked, it was like she'd already decided he didn't belong on this plane. But why? He wasn't loud. He wasn't causing trouble. He was just a guy with a ticket, sitting in his seat. Most people wouldn't care. Most people didn't even notice him. So what was it about Marcus that made her so mad? Was it his clothes? His backpack? Or something else? You're probably wondering too, right? Don't worry, this story's about to take off, and it's going to be a wild ride. Before we go any further, I've got a quick question for you. Do you think Marcus is just going to let this slide, or is something bigger coming? Think about it. He's calm now, but maybe he's got a trick up his sleeve. Maybe he's not as ordinary as he looks. Guess below in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from today. Oh, and if you like stories that keep you guessing, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Because trust me, this is only the beginning. The plane picked up speed now, rolling faster and faster down the runway. Marcus felt his stomach lift as the wheels left the ground. Up, up, up they went, climbing into the gray sky. The clouds swallowed the plane, and soon all he could see out the window was white fluff. It was peaceful, kind of pretty. But peace wasn't going to last, not with Karen around. She was up at the front again, talking to another flight attendant. Marcus couldn't hear what she was saying, but he saw her point his way. The other flight attendant, a guy with short hair, looked over at him and nodded. Uh-oh. What were they planning? Marcus didn't like drama. He wasn't the kind of guy who started fights or made a fuss. Back home, his friends always said he was the chill one, the guy who stayed cool no matter what. And he was trying to stay cool now. He didn't want to give Karen a reason to get madder. But deep down, he was starting to wonder. Why was she picking on him? He hadn't spilled anything, hadn't yelled, hadn't done anything. It was weird. Really weird. And the more he thought about it, the more he felt like something big was coming. Not just for him, but for Karen too. Clara nudged him. "You okay?" she asked. Marcus nodded. Yeah, I'm fine, he said. Just wondering what's up with her. Clara laughed a little. Some people are just grumpy, I guess, she said. Don't let it ruin your flight. Marcus smiled. I won't, he said. But he wasn't so sure. The way Karen kept watching him, it was like she was waiting for something. Waiting for him to slip up. Or maybe waiting for a chance to make a scene. Whatever it was, Marcus wasn't scared. Not yet. He was curious, though. What did she think she knew about him? The plane leveled off now, high above the clouds. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and people started moving around a little. A kid in the back giggled. Someone coughed. Normal plane stuff. Marcus stretched his legs as much as he could in the tiny space and looked around. Everyone seemed happy to be in the air, everyone except Karen. She was still up front, her face all scrunched up like she'd eaten a sour lemon. And every few minutes, she'd glance back at row 12. At Marcus. It was getting old fast. He didn't know it yet, but this flight wasn't going to be like any other. Most flights are boring: sit down, eat a snack, land, go home. But flight 247? Oh no. This one was special. And Marcus was right in the middle of it. Karen thought she had him figured out. She thought he was just some guy she could boss around. But she was wrong. So wrong. And pretty soon, she was going to find out just how wrong she was. What was it about Marcus that made her so mad? You're dying to know, aren't you? Good. Because this story's about to get crazy, and you won't believe what happens next. So stick around, okay? We're just getting started. Marcus is in his seat, Karen's watching him, and something big is brewing. You don't want to miss it? Tell me in the comments, what do you think is going to happen? Is Marcus going to stay quiet, or is he about to surprise everyone? Guess now, and let's see if you're right. Marcus had just found his seat 12B, right next to the window. He liked window seats because he could watch the clouds and the tiny houses far below once the plane was in the air. It made him feel calm. He was about to sit down, sliding his small black backpack under the seat in front of him, when suddenly Karen came rushing over. She moved fast, like a storm cloud rolling in on a sunny day. Her blue uniform swished, and her shoes clicked loud on the floor. Her voice boomed through the plane, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Excuse me, sir, this isn't your seat," she snapped. Her words were sharp, like little darts aimed right at Marcus. Marcus froze for a second, surprised. He wasn't expecting that. His ticket said 12B, clear as day. He'd checked it 3 times, once at the gate, once in the tunnel, and once when he got to his row. There was no mistake. But Karen was acting like he'd snuck onto the plane or something. He stayed calm, though. Marcus was good at staying calm. He didn't yell or get mad. Instead, he pulled his boarding pass out of his pocket and held it up for her to see. "Ma'am, I think there's a mistake," he said politely. His voice was soft but steady, like he was trying to help her figure it out. Karen didn't even look at the ticket at first. She just stared at him, her eyes narrow and her mouth twisted into a frown. Then she snatched the pass from his hand, her fingers quick and rough. She held it up close to her face, squinting at it like she didn't believe the words on it. Marcus waited. He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, watching her. The paper had his name, Marcus Jones, and his seat number 12B printed in big black letters. It was right there. No tricks, no lies. But Karen still didn't back down. She rolled her eyes, big and dramatic, so everyone could see how annoyed she was. Then she muttered something under her breath, just loud enough for Marcus and a few people nearby to hear. "People like you always think they can just take whatever they want." Marcus blinked. People like you? What did that mean? He didn't understand. He wasn't trying to take anything. He had a ticket, just like everyone else. He'd waited in line, walked through the gate, and followed all the rules. So why was she talking to him like that? His stomach felt a little funny, like when you miss a step going down the stairs. Not scared, exactly, but weird. He didn't like it. The lady next to him, Clara, the one with the curly hair and the big purse, shifted in her seat. She looked uncomfortable too. A man across the aisle whispered something to his wife, and she nodded. A few other passengers turned their heads to stare. Everyone could feel it, something wasn't right. Karen handed the boarding pass back to Marcus, shoving it into his hand like it was trash. She didn't say sorry. She didn't say anything nice at all. She just stood there, glaring at him like he'd insulted her whole family. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest, and her foot started tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. It was loud in the quiet plane. Marcus took a deep breath. He could feel all those eyes on him, but he didn't let it shake him. He just sat down in 12B anyway, slow and careful, like nothing was wrong. He wasn't going to argue. Not yet. He slid his backpack all the way under the seat and looked out the window. The workers outside were still moving bags around, and the sky was getting darker. He tried to focus on that instead of Karen. But Karen didn't walk away. Nope. She stayed right there, standing in the aisle next to row 12, staring down at him. Her glare was hot, like the sun on a summer day when you can't find shade. Marcus could feel it burning into the side of his head, even though he wasn't looking at her. Why was she so angry? He hadn't done anything bad. He wasn't loud or mean. He didn't spill anything or break any rules. He was just a guy sitting in his seat, ready to fly home. So what was her problem? It didn't make sense. Not one bit. And the more she stared, the more Marcus started to wonder what was going on in her head. Clara leaned over a little. That was rude, she whispered, so quiet only Marcus could hear. He nodded, just a tiny bit, so Karen wouldn't notice. Yeah, he whispered back. I don't get it. Clara frowned and glanced at Karen, who was still standing there like a statue. She's acting like you stole that seat, Clara said. Marcus shrugged. I didn't, he said. Ticket says 12B. Clara smiled a little. I believe you, she said. She's just being silly. Marcus smiled back, but inside, he wasn't so sure it was just silliness. Karen's anger felt bigger than that. Deeper. Like it wasn't just about a seat. The plane was full now. Every seat had someone in it, even 12C next to Marcus. A guy with a red hat sat there, reading a book, not paying attention to the drama. People were buckling their seat belts and pulling out snacks. The air smelled like pretzels and perfume. The engines hummed louder, getting ready to take off. But Karen wasn't moving. She kept standing there, watching Marcus like he was a puzzle she couldn't figure out. Or maybe like he was a bug she wanted to squish. It was weird. Really weird. And it was starting to make the other passengers antsy. A lady 2 rows up turned around and looked at Marcus, then at Karen. She whispered something to the kid next to her, a little girl with pigtails. The girl giggled, but then stopped when Karen shot them a mean look. Across the aisle, the man with the wife leaned over and said something quiet. His wife shook her head and said, "SHH, they were all watching now, sneaky-like, pretending they weren't." Marcus could feel it. All those little looks, all those whispers. It was like being in school when the teacher calls you out in front of the whole class, even though you didn't do anything wrong. He didn't like it, but he kept his face calm. No frowning, no yelling. Just calm. Karen finally spoke again. "You sure this is your seat?" she asked, her voice loud and sassy. Marcus looked up at her. "Yes, ma'am," he said, nice and clear. He held up the ticket again, just in case she wanted to check it one more time. She didn't take it this time. She just huffed, a big puff of air through her nose, like a horse. "Fine," she said, but it didn't sound fine. It sounded like she was mad she couldn't prove him wrong. Then she turned and stomped back up the aisle, her shoes clicking even louder than before. Marcus watched her go. Her back was stiff, and her hands were balled into fists. She was really mad. But why? Clara shook her head again. "She's got a bee in her bonnet," she said. Marcus didn't know what that meant exactly, but he guessed it was something about Karen being grumpy. "Maybe," he said. He didn't want to talk too much about it. Not with all these people around, listening. He could still feel their eyes on him, even though Karen was gone for now. He turned back to the window. The plane was moving, rolling slow toward the runway. He tried to focus on that. The rumble under his feet, the way the wings bounced a little as they turned. It was cool. Planes were cool. Karen. Not so much. But even though she was up front now, Marcus knew she wasn't done. He could tell. The way she'd said fine wasn't the end of it. It was more like a we'll see about this later kind of fine. And that made him think. What was she so angry about? Was it him? Something he did? Or something she thought he did? He didn't have a clue. Not yet. But he was starting to get a funny feeling, a little tickle in his brain that said maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one hiding something. What was Marcus hiding up his sleeve? That's the big question, isn't it? And trust me, it's a good one. The plane stopped for a minute, waiting its turn to take off. Marcus looked around again. The passengers were settling down now. The whispers had stopped, mostly. The little girl with pigtails was coloring in a book. The man with the wife was eating peanuts. Clara was digging in her purse, pulling out a candy bar. She offered Marcus a piece. Want some? She asked. He smiled. Sure, thanks, he said. He took a small bite. It was chocolate, sweet and melty. It made him feel a little better. But not all the way better. Because Karen was still up there, and he could see her talking to the other flight attendant, the guy with short hair. They kept looking back at him. Pointing. Whispering. Uh-oh. Marcus chewed his candy and thought. He didn't want trouble. He wasn't that kind of guy. Back home, he was the one who helped his friends when they got into fights, not the one who started them. He liked peace. Quiet. But this wasn't peaceful. This was tense, like the air before a big storm. He could feel it building. Karen's anger, the way she talked to him, the way she looked at him, it was all piling up. And the other passengers watching didn't help. It was like they were waiting for something to happen. Something big. But what? He took another deep breath. Okay, he told himself. Stay cool. Don't let her get to you. He wasn't going to yell or make a fuss. That wasn't him. But he couldn't shake that funny feeling. Karen thought she knew something about him. Something bad. And she was wrong mostly. Marcus wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't here to cause problems. But he was different. Special, maybe. Not in a loud, show-off way, but in a quiet way. A secret way. And Karen? She had no idea. Not yet. The plane started moving again, faster now. The engines roared, and Marcus felt his seat shake. They were about to take off. He looked out the window one more time. The runway stretched out long and gray, and then whoosh, they were up. The ground dropped away, and the plane climbed into the sky. Marcus watched the airport get smaller and smaller until it was just a dot. Cool. He loved that part. But even as the plane soared, the tension didn't go away. It stayed right there, in row 12, between him and Karen. She was coming back. He could hear her shoes again click, 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 getting closer. Marcus didn't turn around. He didn't want to give her the satisfaction. But he knew she was there. Watching. Waiting. Why was she so angry? And what was he hiding? You're probably wondering too, right? Good. Because this is just the start. Something's coming, something big. And when it hits, it's going to change everything. The plane took off with a big whoosh, climbing high into the sky. The engines roared, and Marcus felt his seat shake a little as they zoomed up through the clouds. Out his window in 12B, everything turned white and fluffy. It was pretty cool, like flying through a giant cotton ball. Most people on flight 247 settled down now. The little girl with pigtails a few rows up started coloring again. The man with the red hat in 12C kept reading his book. The noise of takeoff faded into a soft hum, and the plane leveled off, high above the ground. Marcus thought maybe things would calm down now. Maybe he could relax. But nope, the tension didn't land. It stayed right there, buzzing around him like a pesky fly he couldn't swat away. Karen, the grumpy flight attendant, wasn't letting it go. She kept walking up and down the aisle, her shoes clicking loud on the floor. Every time she passed row 12, she threw Marcus a dirty look. You know, the kind like when someone thinks you ate the last cookie and won't admit it. Her eyes were all squinted, and her mouth was a straight line, like she was biting back something mean to say. Marcus noticed, but he didn't say anything. He just sat there, looking out the window or at his hands in his lap. He didn't want to give her a reason to get madder. But Karen? She wasn't making it easy. A little while after takeoff, she came by with the drink cart. It was one of those metal carts with wheels, full of soda cans and tiny bags of pretzels. She pushed it slow, stopping at each row to hand stuff out. When she got to row 12, something funny happened. She reached over to give Miss Clara Marcus's seatmate a cup of water, and her elbow bumped Marcus's arm. Hard. His elbow was just resting on the armrest, not in the way or anything, but bam, she hit it anyway. The cart wobbled a little, and a can of soda almost fell off. Marcus looked up, surprised. Oops, Karen said, but she didn't sound sorry. Not one bit. Her voice was flat, and she didn't even look at him. Marcus rubbed his elbow. It didn't hurt much, just stung a tiny bit. He smiled at her anyway. No problem, he said, nice and calm. Karen blinked, like she didn't expect that. She stared at him for a second, then huffed and moved on to the next row. Miss Clara, the older lady with curly hair sitting in 12A, watched the whole thing. She waited until Karen was a few steps away, then leaned over to Marcus. That wasn't an accident, she whispered, her voice low so no one else could hear. Marcus shrugged. Maybe not, he said, keeping his voice quiet too. But it's okay. Miss Clara raised an eyebrow, like she was trying to figure him out. You're handling this better than I would, young man, she said. Marcus chuckled softly, a little laugh that didn't make much noise. I've dealt with worse, he said. His voice was light, like it was no big deal, but there was something in his eyes, a quick flash of something serious. Miss Clara noticed. She tilted her head, curious. Worse, huh, she said. Like what? Marcus didn't answer right away. He just smiled again, smaller this time, and looked back out the window. The clouds were still there, big and white, rolling past like waves. Miss Clara waited, but he didn't explain. Not yet. She didn't push him, though. She just nodded and took a sip of her water, letting it drop. But now she was wondering what had Marcus dealt with before? What made him so good at staying cool? A few minutes later, Karen came by again. This time, she was picking up empty cups and trash. She had a little bag in her hand, and people were tossing their wrappers into it. When she got to row 12, it happened again. She reached over to grab Miss Clara's cup, and bam, her cart bumped Marcus's elbow. Twice now. This time, it was harder, and his arm slid off the armrest. The cart rattled, and a bag of pretzels fell onto the floor. Marcus caught it before it rolled away and held it up to her. Here you go, he said, still smiling. No problem. Karen snatched the pretzels from his hand, her fingers quick and jerky. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything. She just gave him another dirty look, her eyes all narrow and mean, and kept going. Miss Clara shook her head. Twice, she whispered to Marcus. That's no accident. She's doing it on purpose. Marcus nodded, just a little. Yeah, he said. I think so too. But he didn't sound mad. He didn't sound upset at all. He was still calm, like a lake with no ripples. Miss Clara stared at him. How do you stay so nice? She asked. Marcus shrugged again. No point in getting mad, he said. Not yet. That not yet stuck with Miss Clara. She didn't say it out loud, but she wondered what was he waiting for? Was he just going to let Karen keep being mean? Or was something else coming? She didn't know Marcus well, they'd only met when they sat down, but she could tell he wasn't like most people. Most people would have complained by now. Most people would have said something like, hey, stop bumping me, or what's your problem? But Marcus? He just sat there, smiling, like he had a secret he wasn't ready to share. And maybe he did. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't done. Oh no. She finished picking up trash and rolled her cart to the back of the plane. Marcus couldn't see her from his seat, but he could hear her. Her voice floated up from the little kitchen area where the flight attendants hang out. She was talking to another flight attendant, a guy with short hair and a blue vest. His name tag said Tom, but Marcus didn't know that yet. Karen's voice was sharp and hissy, like a cat when it's mad. He's trouble, she said. I can tell. Her words were loud enough to carry, and a few passengers turned their heads. Marcus heard it too. He didn't move, but his ears perked up. Trouble. Him. That was news to him. Tom, the other flight attendant, said something back, but it was quieter. Marcus couldn't make it out. Whatever it was, Karen didn't like it. No, I'm serious, she hissed. He's up to something. You'll see. Marcus raised an eyebrow, just a tiny bit. Up to something? He was just sitting there, eating a piece of Miss Clara's candy bar and looking at clouds. What did she think he was doing, planning to steal the plane? It was silly. But Karen sounded so sure, like she'd caught him with his hand in a cookie jar. Little did she know, trouble wasn't what Marcus was bringing. Trouble was about to find her. Miss Clara heard it too. She leaned over again. Trouble, she whispered. She's nuts. You're the nicest guy on this plane. Marcus chuckled again, soft and easy. Thanks, he said. She's wrong, though. Miss Clara grinned. I know, she said. But why's she so mad at you? Marcus didn't answer right away. He took a bite of chocolate and chewed, thinking. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe she just doesn't like me. Miss Clara frowned. That's dumb, she said. She doesn't even know you. Marcus nodded. True, he said. But his eyes flicked to the back of the plane, where Karen was still talking. Maybe she didn't know him, but she thought she did. The flight went on. The plane hummed along, steady and smooth. Outside, the clouds started to break up a little, and Marcus could see patches of blue sky. Pretty. Inside, though, things weren't so pretty. Karen kept finding reasons to walk by row 12. Every time she did, she'd slow down just a little, her eyes locked on Marcus. Once, she stopped and pretended to fix something on the cart, but Marcus knew she was watching him. He could feel it. She was waiting for him to mess up, spill something, talk loud, anything. But he didn't. He stayed quiet, polite, normal. It was driving her crazy. Miss Clara noticed too. She's like a dog with a bone, she said, keeping her voice low. Won't let it go. Marcus smiled. Yeah, he said. She's stubborn. Miss Clara laughed, a little snort that made the guy in 12C look up from his book. Stubborn's one word for it, she said. Rude's another. Marcus didn't argue. Karen was rude. Bumping his elbow, giving him dirty looks, calling him trouble. It wasn't nice. But he wasn't mad. Not yet. He was waiting. For what? Even he wasn't sure. But something told him this wasn't over. Up in the back, Karen kept talking to Tom. Her voice got louder sometimes, then softer, like she didn't want everyone to hear. But Marcus caught bits and pieces. He's too calm, she said once. It's weird. Tom mumbled something, and Karen snapped, No, I'm telling you he's hiding something. Marcus almost laughed. Hiding something? He was just a guy in a blue shirt, eating candy and waiting to land. Or was he? That little flash in his eyes, the one Miss Clara saw, came back for a second. Maybe Karen wasn't totally wrong. Maybe Marcus was hiding something. But it wasn't what she thought. The plane hit a little bump, turbulence, probably. The seatbelt sign dinged on, and the captain's voice came over the speaker. Folks, we've got some bumpy air, he said. Please stay seated. Everyone listened, except Karen. She kept pacing, her eyes on Marcus. Miss Clara rolled her eyes. She's obsessed, she whispered. Marcus nodded. Looks like it, he said. But he didn't sound worried. He sounded ready. Ready for what? That's the big question. And you're about to find out. The bump stopped, and the sign went off. Karen came by again, this time with nothing in her hands. No cart, no trash bag, just her. She stopped at row 12 and stared at Marcus. Everything okay here? She asked, but her voice wasn't friendly. It was suspicious, like she thought he'd done something bad. Marcus looked up at her, calm as ever. Yep, he said. All good. Karen didn't move. She just stood there, staring. Miss Clara coughed, loud on purpose, and Karen finally walked away. "She's nuts," Ms. Clara said. Marcus didn't say anything. He just watched Karen go, his mind ticking. What was Marcus waiting for? Why wasn't he mad? Most people would be. Most people would have told her off by now. But Marcus was different. He dealt with worse, like he told Ms. Clara. Worse than a mean flight attendant with a bad attitude. Worse than dirty looks and elbow bumps. And that's why he wasn't shaking. That's why he wasn't yelling. He was waiting. Watching. And Karen? She had no clue what was coming. She thought he was trouble. Oh, she was so wrong. Trouble was sneaking up on her, and it was getting closer every minute. The plane had been flying for just 6 minutes. 6 little minutes since the wheels left the ground and the clouds swallowed them up. Everything seemed normal, well, almost. The hum of the engines was steady, the clouds outside Marcus's window in 12B were fluffy and white, and most people were busy with their snacks or books. Ms. Clara, the nice lady next to him, was munching on her candy bar. The little girl with pigtails a few rows up was giggling at her coloring book. It was a regular flight, or so everyone thought. But then, something big happened. Something huge. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker, loud and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we've got a special guest on board today." His words echoed through the plane, bouncing off the walls and seats. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Ms. Clara froze with her candy halfway to her mouth. The man in 12C with the red hat looked up from his book. The little girl's crayons paused on the page. Even the whispers and rustling stopped. It was dead quiet, except for the hum of the plane. A special guest? Who? People started looking around, their heads turning this way and that, trying to figure it out. Karen, the grumpy flight attendant, was up near the front, talking to Tom, the other flight attendant. She'd been complaining about Marcus again. Marcus could tell by the way she kept pointing back at row 12. Her voice was sharp, like always, cutting through the air. "He's trouble," she was saying, just loud enough for a few people to hear. Tom was nodding, but he didn't look so sure. Then the captain's voice came on, and Karen stopped mid-sentence. Her mouth hung open, like she'd forgotten what she was going to say next. Her arms dropped to her sides, and she turned toward the speaker in the ceiling, listening hard. Her eyes got wide, and for the first time, she didn't look mad. She looked confused. Back in row 12, Marcus sat still. He'd been quiet the whole flight, taking Karen's dirty looks and elbow bumps without a fuss. But now he moved. Slow and calm, like he had all the time in the world, Marcus stood up. His tall body unfolded from the tiny seat, and he straightened his blue shirt. Every eye in the plane turned to him. Ms. Clara gasped a little, her candy bar falling into her lap. The man in 12C dropped his book with a soft thud. The little girl peeked over her seat, her pigtails bouncing. Marcus didn't rush. He didn't look nervous. He just reached into his jacket pocket, cool as a cucumber, and pulled something out. It was a badge. A shiny, silver badge that caught the light from the little bulbs above the seats. He held it up high, so everyone could see. The badge sparkled, gleaming bright under the cabin lights. Big black letters were stamped on it, Federal Air Marshal. Gasps filled the plane, loud and sharp, like a bunch of balloons popping all at once. Ms. Clara clapped a hand over her mouth. "Oh my," she whispered. The man in 12C's jaw dropped. The little girl's eyes got huge, and she tugged her mom's sleeve, whispering, "Mommy, look." Whispers erupted everywhere, buzzing through the rows like bees in a hive. A Federal Air Marshal? On their plane? No way. Marcus spoke then, his voice loud and clear, cutting through all the noise. "I wasn't going to say anything," he said, looking around at all the shocked faces. "But I think it's time." His words were steady, not shaky or scared. He didn't yell, but he didn't have to. Everyone heard him. He turned his head and looked right at Karen, who was still frozen up front. Her face went pale, like all the color drained out of it. Her hands shook a little, and her clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. She didn't bend to pick it up. She just stared at Marcus, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "I've been watching how this crew treats people," Marcus said, his voice firm now, like a teacher who means business. He held the badge higher, letting it shine. And you, ma'am, just crossed a line. He pointed at Karen with his free hand, his finger steady and sure. The whole plane went quiet again, so quiet you could hear the engines humming louder than ever. Karen's eyes got even wider, and she took a tiny step back, bumping into Tom. Tom looked surprised too, his eyebrows shooting up like little arrows. The passengers leaned forward in their seats, holding their breath. Crossed a line? What did that mean? What was Marcus going to do? Marcus turned to Tom, the other flight attendant, and nodded at him. Call the captain, he said. Now. His voice wasn't mean, but it wasn't a question either. It was an order, plain and simple. Tom blinked, like he wasn't sure he heard right. Okay, he mumbled. He fumbled with a little phone thing on the wall, a special one flight attendants used to talk to the captain. He pressed a button and started talking fast, his voice too quiet for Marcus to hear. But Marcus didn't need to hear. He knew what was happening. The truth was out, and it was big. The whispers started up again, louder this time. A marshal, the man across the aisle said to his wife. No kidding. The wife nodded, her eyes glued to Marcus. I knew he was special, Miss Clara said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. She grinned at Marcus, proud as anything. The little girl's mom whispered, he's like a secret hero. The girl giggled and clapped her hands. Everyone was talking now, their voices mixing together into a big, excited hum. Marcus wasn't just some guy in 12B anymore. He was a federal air marshal, a real-life protector who rides planes to keep them safe. And Karen? She'd messed with the wrong guy. Karen finally found her voice. I didn't know, she stammered, her words tripping over each other. Her hands waved in the air, like she was trying to push the truth away. I didn't know you were, that. She pointed at the badge, her finger shaking. Her face wasn't pale anymore, it was turning red, like she was embarrassed and mad all at once. Marcus didn't flinch. He just looked at her, calm and steady, the badge still in his hand. Doesn't matter, he said. You don't treat people like that. Not me, not anyone. His voice was strong, and it hit Karen like a slap. She flinched, her shoulders hunching up. The passengers nodded. Yeah, the man in the red hat said, loud enough for everyone to hear. She was mean to him. Miss Clara piped up too. Bumped his elbow twice on purpose, she said, crossing her arms. The little girl's mom added, she yelled at him for no reason. More voices joined in, agreeing, cheering Marcus on. Karen looked around, her head spinning from side to side. All those eyes were on her now, not Marcus. And they weren't happy eyes. They were mad. They were shocked. They saw her for what she was, a bully who'd picked on the wrong person. Tom came back from the phone, his face serious. Captain's coming, he said to Marcus. Marcus nodded. Good, he said. He lowered the badge but didn't put it away. He held it in his hand, letting it shine, a reminder of who he really was. Karen took another step back, her shoes squeaking on the floor. I didn't mean it, she said, louder now, like she was begging. I thought he was just. She stopped, her words drying up. She didn't know what to say. She'd thought Marcus was just some guy, someone she could boss around. But she was wrong. So wrong. The door to the front of the plane, the one that leads to where the pilot sits, swung open. Out stepped the captain, a tall man with a gray hat and a blue jacket. His face was stern, like a principal who's about to give someone detention. He walked down the aisle, slow and steady, his boots thumping on the carpet. Everyone watched him, holding their breath again. He stopped at row 12 and looked at Marcus. Air Marshal Jones, he said, his voice deep and loud. Marcus nodded. Yes, sir, he said. The captain tipped his hat a little, a tiny salute. Heard you've got a problem, he said. Marcus pointed at Karen again. She's been rude, he said. Yelling at me, bumping me, saying I'm trouble, all for no reason. He kept his voice even, like he was just telling a story. The captain turned to Karen, his eyes narrowing. That true? He asked. Karen shook her head fast. No, I didn't, she started, but Miss Clara cut her off. It's true, she said. I saw it all. The man in 12C nodded. Me too, he said. The little girl's mom chimed in, she was awful to him. The captain held up a hand, and they all went quiet. He looked at Karen, long and hard. You got anything to say? He asked. Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her hands twisted together, and her face got redder. I didn't know he was a marshal, she mumbled finally. The captain frowned. Doesn't matter, he said, echoing Marcus. You don't treat passengers like that. Ever. His words were heavy, like rocks dropping into a pond. Karen shrank back, looking smaller than before. The captain turned to Marcus. What do you want to do? He asked. Marcus didn't hesitate. She needs to stop, he said. And she needs to learn this isn't okay. The captain nodded. Agreed, he said. He looked at Karen again. You're off this flight, he said. When we land, you're done. Gasps went up again, even louder. Off the flight? Done. Karen's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She knew she'd messed up. Big time. The passengers started clapping. Slow at first, then faster, louder. Miss Clara clapped hardest of all, her hands smacking together like thunder. Good for you, she said to Marcus. The little girl cheered, yay, hero. The man in the red hat whistled. Marcus sat back down, the badge still in his hand. He didn't smile big or cheer. He just nodded, like it was all in a day's work. But inside, he felt good. Not because Karen got in trouble, but because he'd stood up for himself and for everyone else she might have picked on. Karen stumbled back to the little kitchen area, her head down. Tom followed her, shaking his head. The captain tipped his hat to Marcus again. Good work, he said, then walked back to the front. The door shut behind him, and the plane went back to its hum. But it wasn't the same. Everyone was buzzing now, talking about Marcus, the marshal who'd been hiding in plain sight. He wasn't just some guy in 12B anymore. He was a hero. And Karen? She'd never forget it. The truth was out, and it was huge. Marcus had been watching, waiting, all along. Not to cause trouble, but to stop it. And when the time came, he'd shown everyone who he really was. What a moment. The plane flew on, but the air inside felt different, lighter, brighter. Marcus leaned back in his seat, the badge still gleaming in his hand. It wasn't over yet, but the big reveal? That was done. And it was awesome. The big moment had just happened. Marcus, the guy in seat 12B, had shown everyone his shiny badge, Federal Air Marshal. Karen, the mean flight attendant, stood there with her mouth open, her face red and her hands shaking. The whole plane was buzzing with whispers and gasps. Everyone knew now Marcus wasn't just some regular passenger. He was a hero, a secret protector riding the plane to keep it safe. And Karen? She'd picked on the wrong guy. Now it was time for the story to finish, and oh boy, it finished big. The captain stepped out from the front of the plane, where the pilots sit. He was a tall man with a gray hat and a blue jacket, and his face looked serious, like when your teacher catches someone cheating on a test. He'd heard everything over the little phone Tom used to call him. The passengers watched him walk down the aisle, his boots making loud thumps on the carpet. He stopped right by row 12, where Marcus was standing with his badge still in his hand. The captain looked at Marcus, then at Karen, then back at Marcus. He didn't waste a second. Karen, he said sharply, his voice cutting through the air like a knife, you're done. He pointed at her, his finger steady and strong. We don't treat passengers like that, especially not on my plane. His words were loud and clear, and they hit Karen hard. Her eyes got big, and her shoulders slumped, like she'd just dropped something heavy. The passengers gasped again, softer this time, but you could feel the shock ripple through the plane. Done. Did that mean what they thought it meant? Everyone leaned forward a little, waiting to see what happened next. Karen tried to talk. But I didn't, she started, her voice all wobbly. The captain held up his hand, like a stop sign, and she went quiet. No excuses, he said. You yelled at him. You bumped him. You called him trouble, all for no reason. I heard it all. He turned to Marcus. Is that right, Marshal Jones? Marcus nodded, calm as ever. Yes, sir, he said. She's been rude since I got on. The captain's frown got deeper. He didn't like that. Not one bit. Miss Clara, the nice lady in 12A, piped up. It's true, she said, her voice loud and sure. She bumped his elbow twice on purpose. I saw it. The man in 12C, the one with the red hat, nodded too. Yeah, he said. She was mean for no reason. The little girl's mom a few rows up added, she scared my daughter with her yelling. More people started talking, their voices piling up like a big cheer. She glared at him. She said bad stuff. She wouldn't stop. The captain listened, his head turning to hear everyone. Then he looked at Karen again, and his eyes were hard, like stones. You got anything to say? He asked her. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at the floor, her hands twisting together. I didn't know he was a marshal, she mumbled, so quiet it was hard to hear. The captain shook his head. Doesn't matter, he said. You don't treat anyone like that, marshal or not. This is my plane, and we treat people right. His voice was final, like the last bell at school. Karen didn't argue. She just stood there, her head hanging low, like a kid who got caught being naughty. The captain turned back to Marcus. What do you want to happen? He asked. Marcus thought for a second, his badge still shining in his hand. She needs to stop, he said. And she needs to know this isn't okay. The captain nodded. Fair enough, he said. Then he looked at Karen one last time. You're off this flight, he said. When we land, you're done. Security's waiting. Done. That word hung in the air, big and heavy. The passengers gasped again, and then clap, clap, clap. They started clapping. Slow at first, then faster, louder, like rain hitting the roof. Karen's face went white, then red again. Her eyes got shiny, like she might cry, but she didn't say anything. She turned and walked to the back of the plane, her shoes dragging on the floor. Tom, the other flight attendant, followed her, shaking his head like he couldn't believe it. The captain gave Marcus a little nod, like a thank you, then walked back to the front. The door shut behind him with a click, and the plane went back to its steady hum. But it wasn't quiet anymore. Oh no. Everyone was talking now, their voices loud and excited. Marcus sat back down in 12B, the badge still in his hand. He didn't put it away yet. He just held it, letting it shine. Miss Clara reached over and patted his arm, her hand soft and warm. I knew you were special, she said with a big grin. Her eyes sparkled, like she was proud to be sitting next to him. Marcus smiled back, small and quiet. Thanks, he said. I'm just here to keep people safe, not to cause a scene. But sometimes, folks need a wake-up call. His voice was steady, like always, but there was a little spark in it now, a spark of pride. The clapping kept going. The man in 12C clapped loud, his book forgotten on his lap. Way to go, he said. The little girl with pigtails stood on her seat, clapping her tiny hands. You're a hero, she shouted, and her mom laughed, pulling her back down. The man across the aisle and his wife clapped too, smiling big. Good job, the wife said. More people joined in, their hands smacking together, filling the plane with noise. It was like a party, all because of Marcus. He didn't cheer or wave, though. He just nodded, like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal. A really big deal. The plane flew on, high above the clouds. The sky outside was turning pink and orange now, like a sunset painting. Inside, the passengers couldn't stop talking about what just happened. He's a marshal. She's gone. He showed her. The little girl's mom pulled out her phone and started typing, probably telling her friends about it already. The man in the red hat picked up his book but didn't read, he just kept looking at Marcus, like he was a movie star. Miss Clara kept grinning, munching her candy bar again. Best flight ever, she said to Marcus. He chuckled. Maybe, he said. Pretty soon, the captain's voice came on again. Folks, we're starting to come down, he said. We'll land in about 10 minutes. Buckle up. The seatbelt sign dinged, and everyone clicked their belts back on. Marcus tucked his badge into his jacket pocket, finally putting it away. He didn't need to show it anymore, everyone knew who he was now. The plane tilted a little, dipping toward the ground. Out the window, Marcus could see tiny lights below houses and streets getting bigger as they got closer. Landing time. When the wheels hit the runway with a bump, everyone cheered again. Not loud like before, but happy. The plane rolled to the gate, slow and steady, and stopped. The engines shut off, and the doors opened with a whoosh. Marcus stayed in his seat, waiting, while people started grabbing their bags. But then something cool happened. As the passengers walked by row 12, they stopped to talk to him. "Thanks," the man in the red hat said, giving him a thumbs up. "You're awesome," the little girl said, waving before her mom pulled her along. "Good work," the man across the aisle said, and his wife nodded. Even people from the back of the plane, who hadn't said much before, smiled at him. Marcus just nodded back, saying "you're welcome" over and over, quiet and polite. Then the big moment came. 2 security guards in black uniforms stepped onto the plane. They were big guys, with radios on their belts that crackled with voices. Tom pointed to the back, where Karen was sitting, and the guards walked right to her. "Let's go," one of them said, his voice deep. Karen stood up slow, her head still down. She didn't look at anyone, not Marcus, not the passengers, not even Tom. Her blue uniform looked wrinkled now, and her hands hung by her sides. The guards walked her down the aisle, one in front, one behind. Every step she took, the passengers clapped again. Clap, clap, clap. It wasn't mean clapping, it was happy clapping, like they were glad justice was here. Karen passed row 12, and Marcus looked at her. She didn't look back. Her face was red, and her eyes were wet, but she kept walking. The guards took her out the door, and just like that, she was gone. The clapping got louder for a second, then stopped. Ms. Clara patted Marcus's arm again. "She deserved it," she said. Marcus nodded. "Yeah," he said. "She needed to learn." Ms. Clara grinned. "And you taught her," she said. Marcus smiled, just a little. He didn't say it out loud, but he felt good. Really good. The plane started emptying out. People grabbed their bags and shuffled to the door, still talking about Marcus. "That Marshall guy was cool. She's fired now. He's a hero." Marcus waited until most of them were gone, then stood up. He pulled his small black backpack from under the seat and slung it over his shoulder. Ms. Clara stood too, brushing candy crumbs off her lap. "You take care, young man," she said. "You're one of a kind." Marcus smiled bigger this time. "Thanks, Ms. Clara," he said. "You too." She waved and walked off, her purse swinging. Marcus was one of the last to leave. He stepped off the plane and into the airport, the cool air hitting his face. Outside the gate, a few passengers were waiting not to leave, but to see him. The little girl ran up and hugged his leg. "Bye, hero," she said, then ran back to her mom, who laughed. The man in the red hat shook his hand. "Thanks for making the flight safe," he said. Marcus nodded. "Just doing my job," he said. They smiled and walked away, leaving him alone. Later that day, the airline put out a message. It was on their website and all over the news. "We're sorry," it said. "Flight 247 had a problem with a crew member. She's gone now. We don't let people be rude to passengers. Thank you to the brave marshal who helped." Everyone who saw it knew who they meant. Marcus. And Karen? She was fired on the spot. No more job, no more plane, no more picking on people. Word spread fast on phones, on TV, everywhere. People called Marcus the quiet hero, the guy no one saw coming. And he was. Back home, Marcus didn't brag. He didn't tell everyone what happened. He just went back to his normal life, keeping people safe like he always did. But on Flight 247, he'd made a difference. He'd shown Karen and everyone that being mean doesn't win. Being good does. And when he went to bed that night, he slept with a little smile, knowing justice was served. The end. The big moment had just happened on Flight 247. Marcus, the quiet guy in seat 12B, had shown his shiny Federal Air Marshal badge, and Karen, the rude flight attendant, got caught being mean. The captain had stepped out, his gray hat tilted just right, and his voice boomed when he told Karen, "You're done." Everyone on the plane knew what that meant. Karen was in big trouble. Now, it was time to finish the story, and it was going to end with a bang. The captain didn't mess around. He'd listen to Marcus, calm and steady, explain how Karen yelled at him, bumped his elbow with her cart, and called him trouble all for no reason. The captain's face got serious, like when your dad finds out you broke something you weren't supposed to touch. "Karen, you're done," he said sharply, pointing at her. "We don't treat passengers like that, especially not on my plane." His words were like a hammer hitting a nail, bam, straight to the point. Karen's eyes got big, and her hands shook. She tried to talk, but her voice came out all squeaky. "But I didn't mean," she started, but the captain didn't let her finish. "No buts," he said, holding up his hand. "You messed up. Big time." The passengers around them nodded, their heads bobbing like little toys. Miss Clara, the sweet lady with curly hair in 12A, clapped her hands once, loud and sharp. "That's right," she said. She was awful to him. The man in 12C, with his red hat, agreed. "She kept picking on him," he said. The little girl with pigtails a few rows up peeked over her seat and shouted, "She's mean." Her mom pulled her back down, but she was smiling. Everyone could see it. Karen had been wrong, and now she was going to pay. The captain turned to Marcus. "You okay with this?" he asked. Marcus nodded, his badge still in his hand, shining under the plane's lights. "Yes, sir," he said. "She needs to stop being rude. It's not right." The captain's mouth twitched, almost like a tiny smile. "You got it," he said. Then he looked at Karen again, his eyes hard. "When we land, security's taking you off. You're done here." That word "done" hung in the air like a big bell ringing. Done meant no more job, no more plane, no more bossing people around. Karen's face went pale, like she'd seen a ghost. She didn't say anything this time. She just stood there, looking small and sad. The passengers started clapping again. Clap, clap, clap. It started with Miss Clara, her hands smacking together loud and happy. Then the man in the red hat joined in, then the little girl's mom, then the man across the aisle and his wife. Pretty soon, the whole plane was clapping, a big wave of sound rolling from the front to the back. It wasn't mean clapping, it was happy clapping, like when your team wins a game. They were cheering for Marcus, the guy who stayed calm and showed everyone who he really was. Karen looked around, her head turning fast, but no one was clapping for her. They were all on Marcus's side. The captain gave Marcus a little nod, like a secret thank you, then turned and walked back to the front. His boots thumped loud on the carpet, and the door to the pilot's room shut with a click. The plane kept flying, high above the clouds, the engines humming soft and steady. But inside, it was anything but quiet. People couldn't stop talking. "He's a marshal," the man in the red hat said to no one special. "I can't believe it." The little girl's mom whispered to her daughter, "He's like a superhero." The girl giggled and clapped again, even though no one else was now. Miss Clara leaned over to Marcus, her eyes bright. "I knew you were special," she said with a big grin. She patted his arm, her hand soft and warm, like a grandma's. Marcus smiled back, small and quiet, like he always did. "Thanks, Miss Clara," he said. "I'm just here to keep people safe, not to cause a scene. But sometimes, folks need a wake-up call." His voice was steady, like a rock that doesn't move, even in a storm. Miss Clara nodded. "Well, you sure woke her up," she said, laughing a little. Marcus chuckled too, just a soft sound, but it felt good. He didn't like trouble, but he liked knowing he'd helped. Karen had been mean, and now she couldn't be mean anymore, not on this plane, anyway. The flight went on, and the sky outside turned all pink and orange, like a big sunset painting. The captain's voice came on the speaker again. "Folks, we're starting to come down," he said. "We'll land in about 10 minutes. Buckle up." The seatbelt sign dinged, and everyone clicked their belts back on. Marcus tucked his badge into his jacket pocket, sliding it in slow and careful. He didn't need to show it anymore, everyone knew who he was now. The plane tilted a little, dipping toward the ground, and out the window, Marcus saw tiny lights below. Houses, streets, cars, they got bigger and bigger as the plane got closer. Landing time was almost here. When the wheels hit the runway bump, everyone cheered again. Not a big cheer like before, but a happy one, like when you finish a fun game. The plane rolled to the gate, slow and steady, and stopped with a little jerk. The engines turned off, and the doors opened with a whoosh. Cool air rushed in from outside, smelling like the airport fuel and coffee and a little bit of rain. People started grabbing their bags from the overhead bins, their voices loud and excited. "That was wild," the man across the aisle said to his wife. "A real marshal." The wife nodded, her eyes still on Marcus. "He's so brave," she said. Marcus didn't get up right away. He waited, letting other people go first. But as they walked by row 12, something cool happened. They stopped to talk to him. The man in the red hat leaned over. "Thanks, man," he said, giving Marcus a thumbs up. "You made the flight awesome." Marcus nodded. "You're welcome," he said. The little girl with pigtails ran up, her mom right behind her. "You're my hero," she said, then hugged his leg quick before her mom pulled her away. "Say thank you, sweetie," her mom said. "Thank you," the girl shouted, waving as they left. Marcus waved back, smiling a little bigger now. The man across the aisle shook Marcus's hand. "Good work out there," he said. His wife smiled. "You're amazing," she added. Marcus nodded again. "Thanks," he said. "Just doing my job." More people came by, people from the back, people he hadn't even talked to before. "Way to go. You're the best. Thanks for stopping her." They kept saying stuff like that, their faces all happy and bright. Marcus said "you're welcome" so many times, he lost count. It felt good, like getting a gold star on a test. Then the big moment came. 2 security guards stepped onto the plane. They were tall and strong, wearing black uniforms with shiny badges on their chests. Their radios crackled with voices, and their boots squeaked on the floor. Tom, the other flight attendant, pointed to the back, where Karen was sitting all alone. Her head was down, her hands in her lap. "Over there," Tom said. The guards nodded and walked right to her. "Let's go," the first guard said, his voice deep and loud. Karen looked up, her eyes wet and red. She didn't argue. She just stood up slow, like her legs didn't want to work. The guards walked her down the aisle, one in front, one behind. Her blue uniform was all wrinkled now, and her shoes dragged a little with every step. The passengers watched, their eyes following her. When she got to row 12, Marcus looked at her. Just for a second. She didn't look back. Her head stayed down, and her face was a mess, red, puffy, sad. The guards didn't stop. They kept going, right out the door. And then clap, clap, clap. The clapping started again. It was loud, happy, like a big cheer. Miss Clara clapped hardest of all. "Good riddance," she said. The little girl's mom clapped too. "She's gone," she said. The man in the red hat whistled, sharp and high. Karen disappeared through the door, and the guards went with her. The clapping stopped after a minute, and the plane got quiet again. Marcus grabbed his small black backpack from under the seat and stood up. Miss Clara stood too, brushing candy crumbs off her skirt. "You take care, young man," she said, her voice warm. "You're one of a kind." Marcus smiled, bigger this time. "Thanks, Miss Clara," he said. "You too." She patted his arm one last time, then walked off, her purse swinging as she went. Marcus was one of the last to leave. He stepped off the plane and into the airport, the cool air hitting his face like a splash of water. The tunnel thing, the one that connects the plane to the gate, was empty now, just him walking through. His shoes squeaked on the floor, and he could hear voices up ahead. When he got to the gate, a few passengers were still there, waiting. Not to leave, but to see him. The little girl ran up again, her pigtails bouncing. "Bye, hero," she shouted, then hugged his leg one more time. Her mom laughed. "She's your biggest fan," she said. Marcus chuckled. "Thanks," he said, waving as they walked away. The man in the red hat came over next. "Hey, thanks for keeping us safe," he said, shaking Marcus's hand hard. "That was crazy." Marcus nodded. "Just doing my job," he said. The man grinned. "Well, you're good at it," he said, then left with a wave. A few more people said stuff like that, great job. You're awesome. Before they all headed out. Marcus stood there for a minute, alone now, watching them go. The airport was busy, people running with suitcases, voices on the speakers calling out flights. But for him, it was calm. Quiet. Done. Later that day, the airline put out a message. It was on their website, on TV, everywhere. We're sorry, it said. Flight 247 had a problem with a crew member. She was rude to a passenger, a federal air marshal. She's gone now. We don't let that happen. Thank you to the marshal who helped us fix it. People read it and knew right away they were talking about Marcus. And Karen? She was fired on the spot. No more job, no more uniform, no more plane. She was out, just like the captain said. Word spread fast. People talked about it on their phones, at home, at school. Did you hear about the marshal on Flight 247? He stopped a mean lady. She got fired. It was everywhere. They called Marcus the quiet hero, the guy no one saw coming. Newspapers wrote about it. TV people told the story on the news. Even kids at school, the little girl's friends, heard about it and thought it was the coolest thing ever. Marcus didn't see most of it. He didn't have a TV on, and he wasn't checking his phone. He was just home, back to his normal life. That night, Marcus sat on his couch. His small black backpack was by the door, right where he'd dropped it. The house was quiet, just the sound of a clock ticking on the wall. He thought about the flight, Karen's dirty looks, the badge in his hand, the clapping. He didn't brag to anyone. He didn't call his friends and say, "Guess what I did?" That wasn't him. He was the chill guy, the one who stayed cool no matter what. But he smiled a little, just to himself. Justice was served. Karen learned her lesson. The plane was safe. And that felt good. He got up, turned off the lights, and went to bed. The moon was out, shining through his window, big and bright. Marcus pulled the covers up and closed his eyes. He didn't dream about the flight or Karen or the badge. He just slept, peaceful and happy, with that little smile still on his face. He'd done his job. He'd helped people. And tomorrow, he'd do it again, quiet, calm, and ready. The quiet hero no one saw coming, but everyone remembered. And back at the airport, the story lived on. People who'd been on Flight 247 told their families. Families told their friends. Friends told their neighbors. There was this guy, they'd say. A marshal. He stopped a mean lady and saved the day. Kids drew pictures of him tall, with a badge, standing strong. Teachers talked about it in class, how being kind matters, how being fair wins. Marcus didn't know all that. He didn't need to. He'd done what was right, and that was enough. The airline changed too. They made new rules: no more rude crew members, no more picking on passengers. They wanted every flight to be good, not just for marshals, but for everyone. And Karen? She was gone for good. No one knew where she went, but she wasn't flying anymore. She'd gotten her wake-up call, just like Marcus said. And Flight 247? It became famous not for being fancy or fast, but for being the flight where justice flew high. Marcus slept on, the hero of the day. The plane was quiet now, parked at the gate, waiting for its next trip. But the story? It kept going, bigger and brighter every time someone told it. And that's how it ended, with clapping, smiles, and a lesson no one would forget. Okay, so that was the wild story of Marcus and Karen on Flight 247. The plane landed, Karen got taken away by security, and Marcus turned out to be a super cool federal air marshal. Everyone clapped, Ms. Clara called him special, and the airline said sorry for what happened. Karen lost her job, and Marcus went home as the quiet hero no one saw coming. Pretty awesome, right? But now, let's talk about what it all means. What's the big lesson here? Let's figure it out together, because this story has something important to say, something that can help you in your own life, too. So, what's the lesson? Here it is, plain and simple. Sometimes the person you think isn't a big deal, the one you underestimate, is the one holding all the power. Think about Marcus. He was just a guy in a blue shirt, sitting in seat 12B with his little black backpack. He didn't look fancy. He didn't act loud or bossy. He smiled, stayed calm, and let Karen be mean to him without fighting back. Karen saw him and thought, oh, he's nothing special. I can yell at him, bump him, call him trouble. She judged him by what she saw on the outside, his clothes, his quiet way, not by who he really was. And guess what? That was her big mistake. It cost her everything: her job, her uniform, her whole day. Boom, gone. Karen didn't know Marcus was a federal air marshal. She didn't know he had a shiny badge in his pocket or that he was there to keep the plane safe. She looked at him and decided he wasn't important, just because he didn't act big and loud like she did. But Marcus was important, way more important than she ever guessed. He had power, real power, and he didn't need to brag about it. When he finally stood up and showed that badge, everyone saw the truth. Karen's jaw dropped, the passengers gasped, and the captain made sure she paid for being mean. That's the thing, sometimes the quiet ones, the ones you don't notice, are the strongest of all. Let's think about that for a minute. Have you ever judged someone too fast? Maybe at school, you saw a kid sitting alone at lunch, not talking much, and you thought, they're boring or they don't matter. Or maybe you saw someone in old sneakers and a plain shirt and figured they weren't cool. But what if that kid's really good at drawing, or knows all about dinosaurs, or helps their little brother with homework every day? What if they're awesome inside, and you didn't give them a chance to show it? That's what Karen did with Marcus. She pointed fingers, rolled her eyes, and decided he was trouble, all because she didn't look deeper. And look what happened: she got a big wake-up call. Here's a little story to help you see it. Imagine you're playing soccer at recess. There's this quiet kid on your team, always kicking the ball soft, not running too fast. You think, ugh, they're no good. We're gonna lose. So you don't pass to them. You keep the ball, trying to score all by yourself. But then, one day, the ball rolls to that quiet kid by accident. They kick it, bam, right into the goal, fast and perfect. Everyone cheers, and you're like, whoa, what? Turns out, they've been practicing at home every night, getting better and better, but they didn't show off. You judged them wrong, just like Karen judged Marcus. That kid had power, soccer power, and you almost missed it. That's the trick, isn't it? You never know who's really in charge. Marcus didn't look like a marshal. He didn't walk around with his badge out, shouting, hey, I'm a big deal. He stayed quiet, watching, waiting. And when the time was right, bam, he showed everyone what he could do. Karen thought she was in charge, strutting up and down the aisle, snapping at people. But she wasn't. Marcus was. The captain listened to him, the passengers cheered for him, and security took Karen away because of him. All that power was hiding inside a guy who just smiled and said, no problem, when she bumped his elbow. Crazy, right? So, next time you're quick to point fingers, think twice. Maybe that person you're mad at, the one you think is annoying or weak, has something amazing inside them. Maybe they're like Marcus, holding a secret badge of their own. Not a real badge, maybe, but something special, like being super smart, or kind, or brave. You don't know until you give them a chance. Karen didn't give Marcus a chance. She saw his quiet smile and thought, he's nothing. Big oops. If she'd been nice, asked his name, or just left him alone, she'd still have her job. But she judged too fast, and it flipped her whole world upside down. Let's try another example. Say you're at the park, and there's a girl pushing her little brother on the swing. She's got messy hair and a ripped jacket, so you think, she's not important. You don't talk to her, don't play with her. But what if she's the best climber on the monkey bars? What if she knows how to build a fort out of sticks, or she's got a laugh that makes everyone happy? You'd never know, because you decided she wasn't worth it, just like Karen decided Marcus wasn't worth it. And just like Karen, you'd miss out. That girl might be in charge of fun at the park, and you'd never see it coming. That's the cool part about this story. It's not just about Marcus being a marshal or Karen getting fired. It's about how we look at people every day. Do we see them for real, or do we just guess? Marcus didn't need to prove anything to Karen at first. He sat there, took her rudeness, and waited. But when he stood up, wow! He showed her, and everyone else, that you can't judge a book by its cover. Ever heard that saying? It means don't decide what something's like just by looking at it. A book might have a boring cover but an amazing story inside. Marcus was like that book, plain on the outside, incredible on the inside. What do you think? Did Karen get what she deserved? Let's talk about that. She was mean, right? She yelled at Marcus for no reason, bumped his elbow twice, and told Tom he was trouble. She didn't say sorry, not once. Even when Marcus showed his badge, she just stammered, "I didn't know," instead of saying, "I'm sorry." That's not cool. Being mean and not fixing it deserves a consequence, like when you get time out for pushing someone on the playground. Karen's consequence was losing her job. The captain said, "You're done," and security took her away. The passengers clapped because they thought it was fair she couldn't keep being rude and get away with it. But maybe you feel a little bad for her. Maybe you think, poor Karen, she didn't know he was a marshal. That's okay to feel. She did look sad when she left, her head down and her eyes wet. Losing your job is tough, like when you lose your favorite toy and can't find it. But here's the thing, she had lots of chances to stop. Marcus didn't yell back. He didn't make a fuss. He gave her time to be nice, but she kept going, glaring, bumping, whispering. If she'd stopped, even once, maybe the captain would have let her stay. But she didn't. She kept being mean, and that's why she got what she got. Fair, right? Think about your own life again. Have you ever been like Karen? Maybe you teased someone because they were quiet, or you laughed at someone's old backpack. Did it feel good at first, but then bad later? That's what Karen learned the hard way. Being mean doesn't win. It might feel big for a minute, but then it falls apart. Marcus won because he was good, calm, kind, strong. He didn't need to be loud or pushy. He just waited, and when the time came, he showed his power. That's the real win, being yourself, doing what's right, and letting the truth come out. So, here's a challenge for you. Next time you meet someone new at school, at the park, anywhere, don't judge them too fast. Don't think, they're weird or they're not cool just because they're quiet or different. Give them a chance. Say hi. Ask their name. Maybe they're like Marcus, hiding something awesome inside. Maybe they're funny, or smart, or really good at building Lego towers. You won't know until you try. And if you do, you might make a friend or find a hero when you least expect it. This story got your heart racing, didn't it? The suspense, the badge, the clapping, it's like a movie. Marcus standing up, Karen getting taken away, the captain being all serious, it's exciting stuff. If it made you cheer or gasp, share it with a friend. Tell them, hey, you gotta hear this. Let them feel the fun too. Stories like this are for sharing, because they remind us to be kind, to look deeper, to be brave like Marcus. What do you think? Would your friend like it? Would they cheer for Marcus too? Let's imagine one more thing. Picture Marcus years from now, telling this story to his own kids. He's sitting on a couch, maybe with a cup of hot chocolate, and his little boy or girl says, "Dad, tell us about the plane." He smiles that same quiet smile and says, "Okay. Once, I was on a flight, and this lady was mean to me. But I had a secret." His kids lean in, eyes big. "What secret?" they ask. "I was a marshal," he says, "and I showed her you can't judge people wrong." His kids cheer, just like the passengers did. And he tells them, always be nice, because you never know who's who. That's Marcus teaching even after the story's done. That's the power of this tale. It's not just about one flight or one mean lady. It's about all of us. Every day, we meet people, quiet ones, loud ones, shy ones, bold ones. And every day, we get to choose, judge them fast, or give them a chance. Marcus showed us the smart way. Karen showed us the silly way. Which one will you pick? I bet you'll pick Marcus's way, because it's better, it's stronger, it's kinder, it's right. So, let's wrap it up with this: be like Marcus. Stay calm, be good, and don't let mean people shake you. You've got power inside you, maybe not a badge, but something special. Maybe it's your smile, your ideas, your heart. Don't hide it forever, but don't flaunt it either. Let it shine when it's time, just like Marcus did. And next time someone's quick to point fingers at you, think twice about fighting back. Maybe you're the one in charge, and they just don't know it yet. What a cool thought, huh? What do you think, did Karen get what she deserved? Was Marcus the hero you'd want to be? Drop your ideas below, tell me what you feel. And if this story made your heart beat fast or your hands clap, share it with a friend. Let's keep it going, because stories like this, they're the best kind. They teach us, they lift us, they make us better. Thanks for sticking with me, and see you next time for more fun.